Hello, everybody. Welcome to Profiling Evil Live. I'm Mike King. It's great to be with you. I'm dialing in from the East Coast. Been in New York the last couple of days, working downtown in the city at my office, and heading to my office in DC in the morning. Just been busy as can be. Just finished at News Nation. Finished an interview just a minute ago. There's alibis and little lies. Thank you so much. Yeah, they kind of threw me a curveball tonight when we saw that drone imagery flying over the house prior to Brian Kohberger getting arrested, and we wanted to talk a little bit about that. Anyway, it's we got a lot to cover. I haven't been on because I've been working nonstop outside of Utah all week. And I want to cover a couple of things that I keep getting emails on, particularly questions regarding what on earth was this guy doing crossing country with his father. And the timing now is all starting to come a little clearer, which is throwing into question whether police were following from the get-go or whether they figured it out when two cops stopped him independent of each other in Indiana, or was it just 4 days before when they started looking at this guy and bringing him. But what we do know is that he should be pretty darn close to landing in Idaho. And holy cow, isn't it going to be something if we get to see that arrest affidavit? So hello to Michelle Morris. Good to see you, Michelle. Heidi Hajni, is that correct? Did I get that right? Hajni? I think he drove with his father to have an alibi. Yeah, but the alibi he would need, I think, Heidi, is that he wasn't there when the murders happened. So I don't know. Diane, hello. Jojo Wynn, good to see your name pop up. Mary Flynn. Now, I spent some time in between meetings today typing like crazy a couple of thoughts and notes I had, and I threw them all together in the room while I was waiting to go on News Nation and recorded some things. So I'm going to play some recordings, and hopefully we'll have some fun tonight together, and then we'll be done with this. And those of us who are staying up too late can go to bed, and those of you that are just waking up can enjoy it. So I'll keep watching the chats while we're going. Thank you so much, everybody, for supporting me. I don't even know who's on right now. I usually try to see who's on so that I don't interrupt, but I have just been so busy with my day job that I haven't even paid attention to what's going on, and I'm just focused on what I wanted to get out to you tonight. So let's get started with this, and thanks. I'll keep watching the chat. Why would Brian Kohberger's father fly 2,500 miles to join his son on a drive from Pullman, Washington, to their home in Pennsylvania? It costs more to drive than to fly, and it takes nearly 6 times longer. So the question is, was it a different reason? Something different than simply being home for the holidays? Well, hey folks, I'm coming to you live from New York City. Welcome to Profiling Evil and this special edition on Kohberger's flight, or as it might get characterized in upcoming court hearings, his trip home for the holidays. So the question is, why would this guy drive 2,500 miles for a 40-hour straight period of time? Now that's probably over a couple of days, rather than just take a 6-hour flight. I hope you'll take a moment, hit that like and subscribe button, ring the bell, make sure you're getting all the notifications on our videos as they're released. Well, before we talk about Kohberger's cross-country trek, did any of you happen to catch the image of his infraction citation, the one he received about a month before the murders in Moscow? It was for not wearing a seatbelt. Again, it happened a month earlier, but I thought you might be interested in the location of that traffic stop as it relates to the location where the 4 University of Idaho students were murdered. Let's take a look at this map that I've created, which shows the most probable route from the location where he received the citation over to the crime scene. Now, I thought it would be interesting to also include, if he were traveling back and forth, the location where that traffic citation was issued and the correlation with the bar and the food truck. And by the way, did you happen to catch the bar owner's comment? You've seen a lot of creators that have been talking about more rumors of Kohberger being kicked out of the Corner Club bar. Well, just yesterday, that bar released a statement saying he's never even been in the place and they certainly didn't kick him out. Just another false narrative. If that particular tweet was accurate and actually from the owner of that bar. And I think it was. And then, since we're talking about those kind of things, what did you think about that inmate who said Kohberger was shouting at guards as he sat in the jail and exposing himself? Well, the jail commander later came back and said, no, he was acting fine. That's not the case. It's not the guy that was doing that. And yet it got spun out and made a whole lot of good fodder thinking that it was Kohberger. I don't know if you noticed, but I certainly did when he was escorted into the court and out of the court, that his demeanor was pretty reserved. He was taking care of business, but he didn't look like some out-of-control, crazed maniac. Now, like I've mentioned before, it's best to stick with information that comes from official resources and sources, rather than those kind of cool, steamy things that come from an inside scoop. But now, let's talk about that 40-hour road trip. And I think it's going to be interesting to learn about that cross-country trip that Kohberger and his father took in the final days of December. Actually, about the 15th of December, his arrest in the final days of September. Questions are now swirling around law enforcement. Were they watching Kohberger before he started the trek, or did they learn about that vehicle after the fact? And it sounds like they learned about it for some time after. If they were keeping surveillance on this guy, it would have had to have been in those 2 weeks since. I just don't believe now, after looking at this, that law enforcement sat on that house for 2 weeks. Maybe they did, and we'll learn more as the affidavit comes out. The interesting thing, though, is they're pulled over twice in the same state in Indiana. And they're 3/4 the way through the state when they get pulled over. Now, let's think about this. The first time the father and son pair were stopped was just outside of a rest area, mile marker 107, they say. But then, 10 minutes later, that first stop was by a deputy. 10 minutes later, a state trooper pulled over the two men and approached them again. Now, that stop was captured on body camera, and the video has circulated a little bit. So let's watch that real quickly.
Hello.
How you doing?
How y'all doing today? Good, good. Take a look at your driver's license real quick if I could.
Sure.
See, he's right up on that van, man. He was right up on the back end of that van. Pulled you over for tailgating. Is this your car? Okay. Cool. Where are you headed?
We're going to actually inside. Well, we're coming from WSU, and we're scanning early.
What's WSU?
Yeah, I go to university basically. The real incident that was occurring with the shooting incident. That is SWAT team and everything.
So we're okay. I'm having a hard time hearing you because of the traffic. So you're coming from Washington State University,
Yeah.
and you're going where? Oh.
We're going to be going to Pennsylvania.
Oh, okay.
Pocono Mountains. Yeah. So we're slightly punchy because we're driving for hours.
Hours, days.
Hours to drive. Well,
Yeah.
almost a day.
Okay. And what did you say about some SWAT team thing? Or
Yeah,
something?
there was a mass shooting and everything. We don't
Where?
know if it was a mass
Where?
shooting. This was on essentially that's the valley.
Interesting.
Well, it's horrifying because he's just over the universe, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. So y'all work at the university there?
I actually do work there.
Oh.
PhD in criminal
Okay. Okay. Yeah, I hadn't heard about that incident? Just yesterday, or?
This happened this morning. About an hour and a half ago. They're still wrapping it up for investigating. I'm not sure there's two shooters because they did shoot somebody.
Let's see.
And then we don't know about that actually. They were apparently like shooting out of the window or something.
Interesting. Wow. Okay. But do me a favor, don't follow too close, okay?
Oh.
All right. Thank you. Appreciate you.
So I got to stop for a minute because I'm loving reading the comments there. Yeah, I'm going to address this driving versus flying idea in a second. We'll talk about that. I recognize some people have seen some of these things already. Again, remember, folks, I'm cutting this thing all day long between meetings trying to get this video put together. So for those of you who have seen it, I'm sorry. And I don't know about you. I like watching some things over and over again, but let's jump back into this. What are the chances that these two guys would be stopped twice within a 10-mile radius? And how do you feel about law enforcement not thinking about that car? Again, this is halfway across the country, but they knew, and it had been advertised for weeks, that law enforcement was looking for a white Hyundai Elantra. Hasn't every person in the free world been looking for that vehicle? This is crazy. But giving them the benefit of the doubt, it was about a week or 10 days before that Idaho officials started talking about that white Elantra. So we've got to keep in mind that while the arrest happened around the 29th, 30th of December, this was 2 weeks earlier when he was pulled over, and only a week after they started advertising that vehicle being out there. Now, I would have loved to have been a fly on the wall of that car, though, when these two were pulled over. And I'd love to have had a biometric reading of Kohberger's heart rate when he was pulled over, not only the first time, but the second time. Surely, if he's found to be the killer of those college students, he must have thought he was free and clear when they let him go. Not once, but twice. Well, let's pause long enough to go back to Pullman, Washington, and Kohberger's college apartment. Why wasn't this guy picked up there instead of police waiting until he got to Pennsylvania? Now, I said it before that I didn't think law enforcement was on top of him being the suspect when he made that cross-country trip. Now, seeing this body camera footage from December 15th, I'm pretty darn confident in that position I took early on. But did this guy hope he could somehow get rid of evidence along the way? Or were they waiting for confirmation on the DNA testing so that they could get everything put in order? Those are the questions that we're going to hear when the affidavit comes out, hopefully in the next couple of days. They may have also been hoping, as they told him for what they said was a few days, that they could get some kind of DNA collected, maybe off of a pop can that he was drinking from, or when he was in a restaurant. But listen to my comments and discussion last night from New York with Vinnie Politan on Court TV about this subject.
And joining us now by phone is our retired police commander, host of the Profiling Evil podcast, Mike King. Mike, I'm glad we were able to connect here. Your thoughts, your reaction to the suspect who's been arrested for this quadruple homicide in Idaho?
You know, I'm going to bounce right off of what Bobby's saying here. This idea that was he a killer before this started and he fantasized about it and he worked through this process, followed these kids around, or as he went through this process of studying serial killers, did he start to become one who fantasized about it? And I don't know that it really matters. The thing that's really important, I think, in this case, and I go back to the first week we talked on this show, Vinny, where we talked about that victim selection process and that police were originally saying, hey, this is a targeted event. And that got everybody spun up that this is somebody that's known to these victims. That's not necessarily the case when you're talking about these kinds of violent homicides. That doesn't mean, though, that the offender didn't know who the victim was going to be and could have done a great deal of pre-planning. But I don't think these kids knew who this person was, if in fact he is the killer.
Yeah, if in fact he's the killer, right? He knew them, but they may not have known him.
So I'm gonna pause there for a second because this is a really important part that I brought up in the first week. In fact, it was fun to be on with Vinny last night because I brought it up on his show. This idea of targeted cases of homicide and opportunistic kinds of homicide. And what we have learned over looking at just hundreds, if not thousands, of violent crimes like this is that statistically, someone who is a high risk individual, like someone in the sex trade industry or dealing narcotics, generally by statistic, when they are victimized, they're victimized by someone who is unknown to them. They do not know the offender, but that doesn't mean the offender knows who they are. And when they are taken victim, they fall victim as a victim of opportunity. They happen to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. Now, that might have you upset that I said sex trade worker or drug dealers, because these kids were neither of those. And I'm going to explain this in just a second. But the flip side of that is that low-risk victims, let's say a stay-at-home mom who goes to school on Tuesday night and does parent-teacher conference and goes to the grocery store every Saturday and church on Sunday, has a smaller group of friends. When someone like that is victimized, a Suzanne Morphew, for example, statistically, the person who's going to be looked at is someone who's in their inner circle, who is known to them, and they're actually a target of that criminal act. So that's the difference. Now, there are three things that actually influence and change the level of risk that we take. And those three things are situations, circumstances, and there's another one that I can't remember, but it's late at night for me. So, and the idea is that someone, let's take, for instance, the girls hanging out at the bar all afternoon, then walking to the food truck, and then making their way home, just by virtue of them being outside of the norms, walking down the street, hanging out at a bar where people maybe that they don't know are hanging out at the food truck. Any of those kinds of behaviors start to increase their risk level of having that opportunistic unknown offender follow them and take advantage of them. So from the beginning, I was discussing on Court TV and News Nation and other channels the fact that we have to be really cautious about this word targeted, because I do believe that those kids were targeted, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they were victimized by someone who is known to them. And I think we're going to find that they probably weren't known or didn't know this offender if Kohberger is actually found guilty. And he's alleged right now. So he's not been found guilty of anything. But I think that whoever the predator is in this particular case knew who those victims were and took advantage of them. But there was a question earlier, and I apologize, I forgot who asked it. But the question was, because police are now told you can't talk to anybody, does that mean that the arrest affidavit will be off limits? No, this is going to be a decision by the judge. So what's going to happen is Kohberger will make his first appearance, maybe tomorrow, if not, I suspect on Friday. And after that first appearance, then the judge is going to have to rule if that arrest affidavit is released. I suspect that the defense will try really hard to avoid having it released because they're going to say, oh, no, it would taint a jury. But it is a public record, and we have the right to know that. Sometimes the judges say, nah, not in this case, you don't. So we'll just hope that that happens and move forward. Let's jump back into this. Interested in why you think Kohberger's father chose to fly across the country to meet his son, then ride back with him from Pullman, Washington to Chestnut Hill, Pennsylvania. Now, put your thoughts down below and take a few minutes to read each other's comments, but here are a few thoughts that I have on this subject. First, I'm really scratching my head about Kohberger's father jumping on a plane and flying to Washington just so he could accompany his son back home. Now, like I made comment on, maybe it was pretty benign and it was all about spending some one-on-one dad and son time together. Or maybe Kohberger's parents thought that their kid was getting a little bit off, and they wanted to have some time to spend to dig a little deeper to kind of find out what he's been doing, what he's thinking about, including digging deeper into the fact that their son owns a white Hyundai Elantra, the same kind of car and color that police are looking for in a murder that happened 9 miles away from his home. So I'm troubled by the fact that they not only did that he flew over, but I'm also troubled by the fact that the route they took isn't making immediate sense to me, but there may be perfect explanations for it. For instance, when I plot out the shortest, most probable route from Kohberger's apartment to his parents' home, I come up with this route, which is about 2,584 miles. It says it's a 38-hour trip. And that route doesn't take them along I-70, but we know that they were stopped along I-70 just east of Indianapolis. So to hit that route, you'd have to take a little different kind of a trail that would end up adding about 100 miles to the trip. But more importantly, it would add 2 additional hours to the trip. So why did they do it? That's really got me troubled here. But my question about airplanes, my question about this was really something that made me chuckle when I listened to TMZ's reporting on that same traffic stop and the video camera, body camera from the officers when they asked him, "Are you afraid of flying?"
If you just got stopped, just make sure you give yourself plenty of room. Where at? Yeah, it's a long haul. You guys scared of airplanes?
Regardless, we know that they took the longer route because it's along I-70 that they were stopped by police. So before I leave these fundamental questions regarding driving versus flying, I also want to look at the economics in the decision to drive. Number one, it would require Kohberger's father flying from Pennsylvania to Washington to meet with his son. The least expensive ticket that I could find was about $200 for the one-way flight. Now that's on today's prices, not during the lead up to the Christmas holidays. So I don't know if it would have been more. Now think about this for a moment. A round trip flight ticket for Kohberger, if mom and dad just wanted him home for the holidays, would have been about $399. And that would have gotten him home in 6.5 hours, including layovers. So driving a longer route that takes 40 hours just isn't making sense to me. And beyond the fact that it took so long to drive, fuel costs would be something to think about too. Now, looking at an Elantra's gas mileage, which the best numbers kind of promote 38 miles per gallon, it would have cost $250 to make that one-way trip across country just for fuel. Now, that doesn't take into account motels or hotels, food. And so now if he was actually making a round trip after the holidays, heading back to his studies at the university in Washington, he would have been $500+ just in travel when it would have cost a whole lot less. Instead of 80 hours round trip for driving, it would have been 12 hours round trip to fly with those layovers. So the question clearly haunts me because I keep struggling with this thing. And last night I was asked about it on News Nation. Let's listen.
Watching and waiting for the right moment to nab an alleged killer. For several days, reports say an FBI surveillance team followed Brian Kohberger as he was traveling 2,500 miles across the country to his parents' home in Pennsylvania. And during that time, they knew who their suspect was. They just couldn't move in on him right away. But were they really just watching him, or was there more to it? Were they collecting evidence as he was traveling the country? Were they watching his patterns of behavior to plan their takedown? I want to bring in 2 people who know a lot about this kind of surveillance. Tracy Welder is a former FBI and CIA agent, and Mike King is a former detective and the host of the Profiling Evil podcast. His book is called Deceived. Welcome to both of you. Mike, I want to start with you. On the last segment, we left off at finding the family members through the DNA that might have been found at the scene, right? They say there's DNA found at the scene that they think is the murderers as opposed to all the partygoers. And then they go through the databases and they find all the family members. What comes next, Mike? How do you go through the family members to figure out which one is the one you're looking for?
You have to start isolating, and so you hope that there are other forms of evidence that are driving the investigation and that they're collaborating and corroborating with each other. I suspect that law enforcement was looking at this individual for some time, waiting for that DNA to come back. We heard the chief multiple times saying, we're waiting on forensics. But once he hit the road, and that whole thing has just got you scratching your head about the timing of that, of why he didn't fly home. Why does dad fly out and meet him and they go together? But the question becomes, did law enforcement follow him from the moment he left Pullman? Or when he was pulled over in Indiana, did people figure out, holy cow, this guy in this white Elantra is heading eastbound? And that's when they put the surveillance together. I suspect it happened on the front end, but we may have been caught a little bit flat-footed. But what's happening behind the scenes is we got to get arrest warrants. We got to verify. We got to hope he stops and grabs a Coke somewhere and throws a straw in the garbage can so we can grab some DNA. And once that comparison's made and validated, then, boy, it's time to move forward.
Or his napkin at the truck stop.
Well, with all these items to consider, let's talk behavior for a moment and think about what really does make the most sense. Again, Kohberger's father could have felt like he needed to spend time with his son, needed some one-on-one time, and nobody knows a kid better than parents. Now, media reports suggest that there had been other problems in Kohberger's past, addictions during and at the end of high school, problems being bullied and maybe later turning into a bully, moods changes, and other issues dealing with mental health. So was that the reason they needed to kind of check him out emotionally and mentally? Or was it something a little bigger, like planning to dispose of evidence? And again, I am not casting stones at that dad who rode with him. I'm just saying these are questions that I have. But if so, was there a plan to dispose of evidence along that trip coming cross country? I'm going to be interested in what your thoughts are on that one. But here's where my mind keeps going regarding this first question. I think absolutely it's possible that the family sensed something was wrong. And they clearly would have thought about those murders that had gone on and how close it was to their son's residence. I also think they would have known that police are asking over and again about the white Hyundai Elantra, same kind of car that their son has. So all of those give me reason to think, man, there might be reason for mom and dad to want to talk a little more to him. But unless it's shown that his father was aiding and abetting him in some way, helping him flee from justice, I think it's just speculation. We don't have answers to tell us one way or another, but I hope that they come out. But more important to note, I don't think if his dad didn't know that Kohberger would risk disposing of any evidence on the trip back east, especially if his father wasn't in on the plan to do that. I think it was just too plain risky. But we know, at least for a time, that once law enforcement discovered he was in Indiana, law enforcement started tailing him. And that surveillance continued all the way through to his parents' home and up to the time that he was arrested. Now, if I understand the news reports correctly, the family parked Kohberger's car inside the garage and out of public view. So if a family vehicle was displaced so that they could put his vehicle in the garage, that to me is incredibly interesting, and I would want to know more about why that happened. Yeah, I want to stop there for a moment and just see if any of you happen to know the answer to that. Again, I've been picking up pieces as I can the last couple of days. Does anyone know if his vehicle was in the garage? That's kind of the sense that I received, and I want to clarify that now if that's incorrect. So let me just look at a couple of these as we're going through and see if anybody has a position on that. And, you know, as regarding dad's either going to have to be 100% invested in going cross country and disposing of evidence, which kind of bugs me because if they did hide the car in the garage, that's kind of odd behavior in and of itself. But I just don't believe that he would have been trying to dispose of a knife, for instance. Everybody wants to find that murder weapon on that trip. I think with his dad there, it just creates too much risk. And frankly, he probably would have gotten rid of it if he did get rid of it earlier. The question I keep coming back to is why didn't some of the kids living in that same apartment building in Pullman, 9 miles from this murder, say, hey, there's a white Elantra out in my parking lot? There was a good 8 days before that vehicle made its trip 2,500 miles across country that police were asking for that. And I don't know about you, but I was looking at every white car that passed me in my community after that came out. I don't know. What are your thoughts on that? And if I don't see a response here, we're going to just jump back into this because I want to give you as much of your night back to you as we can. So thanks everybody so much for jumping on, and a little bit disjointed tonight as I've tried to put this together, trying to keep up on the case through watching social media and other things. But this thing's been really interesting. I actually, New York City is not too far from the Poconos, and I had this, I wished I didn't have as many meetings because I was going to just take a little drive down there, but I didn't. I just stayed and drank a Diet Dr. Pepper and wished I would have or something. So anyway, let's jump back into this. Well, now I want to just take a quick minute and listen to Pennsylvania State Police as they talk about the arrest of Kohberger. You can go back and watch that entire 23-minute press conference online if you'd like. I just pulled out the 30 seconds where they actually talk about arresting him. Frankly, it was a little frustrating because the other 22 and a half minutes of the press conference was time spent congratulating each other and answering a few questions with that standard remark to those questions of, we're not going to talk about anything to do with the case. Well, let's watch this 30-second clip I pulled out.
So tactical assets were then staged in the county, in Monroe County, into the evening of Thursday, December 29th, last Thursday. And in the early hours of Friday, December 30th, those warrants were executed at the location. Mr. Kohberger was taken into custody without incident. The scene was turned over to the FBI Evidence Response Team for processing. Mr. Kohberger was then turned over to the Monroe County Prison, where he has remained in their custody since.
Well, I spent some time on Court TV talking about the arrest and reiterating my concerns about Kohberger's father making that trip to Washington. I really think that's the question that needs to be answered.
All right, let's talk about the arrest here. He mentioned surveillance. Our understanding, and we're hearing that there may have been under surveillance for days here, 4 days before he was arrested. Mike, I'll have you go first on this. If you've got someone you believe is a potential mass murderer, you think he's the one that did it, how important is the surveillance to make sure he doesn't strike again? There's a lot of pressure on investigators.
Yeah, I mean, this thing is crazy, Vinny. 9 miles away. If law enforcement didn't know who he was, why weren't people in that community reporting that vehicle sitting there? But then I'm really interested in, why does Dad jump on a plane and fly over to Washington and join his son driving back? If they want him home for the holidays, put him on a plane, fly him home and back. I mean, was it all part of just the fact that sometimes parents know when their kids are getting a little off base and they need a little one-on-one time to try to level out the playing field with them? Or was it that the dad knew that there was something with that vehicle and we got to get it out of there and back where we can hide it in the house? And I'm certainly not casting stones in any of those, but these are the questions that start coming up because law enforcement, I got a sense, didn't really know he was on the radar until he started that drive. And it may have come in Indiana when he got pulled over twice, and all of a sudden somebody thought, holy cow, we've been looking for a white Hyundai.
Mike King, Bobby Chacon, appreciate your time tonight. We're going to be talking a lot about this case. Thanks so
Here's
much.
some thoughts that I have on that early morning arrest. Police mentioned it was much safer to make the arrest at 3 a.m. rather than any other time. And you know what? That makes really good sense. Having served as a SWAT officer and done a lot of those kind of raids, I know that you want the element of surprise on your side. They would have undoubtedly gotten that no-knock search warrant saying it was dangerous to do it, that he's potentially dangerous. If he, in fact, he's the murder suspect, he's proven he can be violent, and that they worry about any evidence being disposed of. So I'm sure that's what enabled them to get that no-knock search warrant. But another reason, again, for not stopping him on the road, if they would have been following him, and again, we don't know if they were or not, is that would avoid a high-speed chase if he were to get spooked when an officer tried to pull him over. This movement of doing this in the early morning hours inside the home was probably the wisest decision. But I'll tell you what, I think that no-knock warrant was approved because they also didn't want to risk the chance that Kohberger could destroy evidence that's so necessary. And as a result of that warrant, they were able to take him into custody. They were able to serve a second warrant where they could collect DNA from him, and a third warrant where they could seize that white Hyundai Elantra and start to process that. So regardless, he's now in custody. And I think he's probably on his way, just about ready to land in Idaho right now. So the next big event is going to be that first court appearance in Idaho. And then we'll all anxiously await the decision by the judge as to whether or not he's going to release that arrest affidavit, which is going to have so much more information for all of us. We've seen judges hold that back in other big cases. So I'm wondering, will it happen here? Snug with a pug, thank you. Ether Bunny, thank you. To all of you, what would one of these things be without me starting to talk with the mic on mute? So thank you so much, Ether Bunny. Really appreciate that. Yeah, is it possible he used his father as a ruse? Man, who knows what this guy's thinking. In fact, I remember Dr. Fred Cowie teaching me a really important principle. We were actually looking at the Unabomber case, and he said something that I'll never forget that I'll share with all of you. He said, while it may not make sense to you, it makes perfect sense to them, whatever the decision is. So whatever he was thinking in his mind made perfect sense, even though it's pretty darn confusing to all of us what these folks might be thinking. So yeah, yeah, took me a while, but hopefully you can all hear me now. It's 11:18 p.m. on the East Coast, and like I said, I was in the city most of the day and kind of a little bit out of sorts. But let's jump back into this.
I'm having a hard time hearing you because of the traffic. So you're coming from Washington State University, and you're going where?
Sorry about that, folks. We are way past that, so I'm going to try to get back to where we were. I must have hit the little back arrow or something. Where to get spooked when an officer tried to pull him over. This movement of doing this in the early morning hours inside the home. I think he's probably on his way, just about ready to land in Idaho right now. So the next big event is going to be that first court appearance in Idaho. And then we'll all anxiously await the decision by the judge as to whether or not he's going to release that arrest affidavit, which is going to have so much more information for all of us. We've seen judges hold that back in other big cases. So I'm wondering, will it happen here? I hope you'll take time to put your thoughts down below and make sure you're hitting that like and subscribe button and ringing the bell and getting all the notifications and sharing Profiling Evil with all your friends. Hey, I want to remind you that we're starting Profiling Evil Season 3 of the Academy series. It's going to be released only to channel members beginning next week. You'll be able to binge watch it. You need to be a channel member to get those 16 episodes. So I hope you'll sign up. It provides us a little financial support and helps us run things in the back office, but it also gives you access before anyone else. If you can't afford it, don't sweat it. We'll release them all in about April or May.
Well, hello everybody, it's Mike from Profiling Evil, and I want to give you a little heads up on some new stuff coming out in 2023. We're going to be releasing Season 3 of the Academy, 16 episodes that are only going to be available for the first couple of months to Academy channel members. So please go over to the channel membership page and sign up. It's only $4.99 a month, and it'll give you a chance to catch up on all those things and, frankly, support Profiling Evil a little bit more. I really appreciate you thinking about that and considering doing it. Now, if you can't afford it, don't sweat it. In about April, we'll start releasing those out to the general public.
So there you go, folks. Thanks for your support of Profiling Evil. We'll see you all soon at the next crime scene.